It's time for the Charlotte FC podcast. Welcome, bienvenidos to the Charlotte FC podcast. I'm Nick Finelli, your host, and today we have an amazing English commentator, born and raised in Birmingham, England, and works for the Apple TV MLS Season Pass as a play-by-play commentator, as well as studio host for CBS Golazo network. We talk about his journey in football, his connections to Charlotte FC, and more. Let's meet Callum Williams. Welcome to the CLTFC podcast. Nick Finelli here, your host, and today I have Cal Williams. As always, we let the guest introduce himself, and Cal, take it away. First of all, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Man, where do we begin? What do I call myself nowadays? Broadcaster, dad, husband, all of the above, really. Yeah, I am a football commentator, working primarily with Apple TV on the MLS production and working alongside that on various different world feeds and mainly with the new CBS Sports Golazo network and a couple of other projects here and there as well. So a very, very busy individual at the moment, whether that's personally or professionally, but very, very good at the moment, Nick, and enjoying things for sure.
Well, you've been a fabulous addition to the MLS as far as a voice for a number of years, having worked for both Kansas City and Minnesota, and now with Apple, and then of course just across the globe with all your other endeavors, doing Premier League and things. So we're going to kind of take a dive into your career, how you got started, what you're doing specifically that kind of can stand out and make a difference, and why you've been so successful. But first of all, you're wearing, the nice flat hat. I was telling you earlier, I almost wore mine. So you're an Englishman. What's your tea of choice?
That is an extraordinary question, Nick. I struggle at times to find a tea that works for me in this country when I'm in certain markets. But luckily here in New York, where I live, a lot of the English and British tea is fairly easy to find. So I'm partial to Tetley's tea. But PG Tips is the one for me that ticks all the boxes. And when I was at Minnesota United for years, I would bring in tea into the office, and I'd be walking around the corporate sponsorship or the marketing room going, anybody want a cup of tea? Going to make one. Anybody want a cup of tea? And here's me then making 14 cups of tea. But you're right. I'm English, and it's a big part of who we are. And when England won yesterday in the Euro semi-finals, I went and poured myself a cup of tea and had a chocolate biscuit with it, and I felt extremely British. And sometimes I don't feel British living in the US for as long as I have now, so it was nice. It was really, really nice. But yeah, PG Tips, to answer the question, is the best I have certainly had. If anybody's looking for a new brand of tea, and little drop of milk, little bit of sugar, perfect.
What's your timing? Because I know if you keep it in too long, don't they call it like a gaffer tea or something like that?
Yeah, so Builder's tea is usually quite strong. Mm-hmm. So I'm usually quite quick in getting it out. I'll leave it sit for maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds if I'm feeling generous or running around after my daughter or something. But my wife leaves it in for a long, long time. She specifically says to me, don't even think about taking that out. Let it sit, because she likes it really strong. And so we have two very different palates when it comes to tea in this household. But yeah, I like to get it out very quickly for sure.
And so you have a child. Is the top child going to be a tea drinker?
Oh, she has no choice. She's half British. She's going to have to.
Well, there's some cool connections that you have with folks on Charlotte FC. If you have a story from any of them, or remembering, or some instance you may have encountered them. First, you may or may not have worked much with Adam Parr, but he was at Minnesota United, he was the head trainer. Right. So do you remember any stories or things from Adam that you could share?
I don't have many stories, but I do remember Adam very well. Yeah, I think we crossed over for about 2 years, maybe even 3 at Minnesota United. And I do remember the players being very, very complimentary of him when he first kind of came in. And not that they were unfit before, because the previous trainer was very, very good as well. But Adam came in and obviously had a glowing resume. And was very well thought of, and did extraordinary things at Minnesota United. So, yeah, I like most people on the staff, I would see him around the training facility, have a quick chat, mainly about football, naturally. And would see him on the road from time to time. And again, rock up at a hotel bar from time to time with him. But,
right.
Nothing out of the ordinary, But, yeah, tremendous human being, really good guy. And that's a tremendous addition for Charlotte FC, that is.
Yeah. So when you work with people like that, that's in an organization, because now you're not, did you get like insights on, players' conditioning and stuff like that? Or was it kind of just separate from, you get that mainly from the coach?
I think it depends on the staff and what the head coach wants. We were very lucky with Adrian Heath that he was very, very open. And he was okay with a lot of the staff sharing certain things with us on the broadcast side. I have many, many, many Adrian Heath stories that I can't tell on a podcast platform, but so many with him just being extremely welcoming. And Adrian operated the way that I like to operate on the road, in the sense of, we're all away from our families and friends. Let's all do this together. We're creating something together. Let's be together. Let's be a unit. Let's be a team. And if you ever speak to my now partner in the booth, Callum on Apple TV, he will tell you I'm the same. Whenever we're away on the roads, I like to get everyone together. English commentary, Spanish commentary, French commentary if they're there. Producer, director, runner, doesn't matter. If we're all on the road, we're all in this together. And so I think that's where I get that mentality from, is Adrian wanting people to be together, and copious amounts of nights at hotel bars. And he would tell us certain things about teams. But to answer your question, Adam and the other medical staff and the other members of Minnesota United at the time, we'd share information about, this person's feeling a little bit of stiffness in their knee or something, so if this happens, don't be surprised. And, it's all in the aid of preparation, right? And, Adam and the staff at Minnesota United were very, very helpful with regards to that, for sure. Yeah, so there was plenty of information they told us that I'm sure was cleared. There was bits of information that they told us, I'm sure, that wasn't cleared. But I think it comes down to trust as well, doesn't it, Nick, and relationships. And I think I was fortunate enough to have a very good relationship with just about everybody at Minnesota United. And it was a good group. It was a really good group that would travel when we did. And like I said, it comes doon to trust. And there were plenty of times when, the fitness trainer that was there, he's now at Real Salt Lake, Sean Buckley, would tell me all sorts of things about, this player's feeling a little tight here, and this guy's not meeting his fitness numbers here, so we're playing in the heat this weekend, so, don't be surprised if he comes off early or something along those lines, so all that stuff helps, for sure. In preparation, all that stuff helps.
All right, we got another person has a connection with you, a Birmingham native, Dean Smith.
Yeah, so quite the connection as well there, by the way. So Dean, who, I've only done a handful of Charlotte games since he's come in. I think I've done 2 Charlotte games since he's been in, but both times he's been great. And everyone I speak to about Dean Smith, every other commentator that does Charlotte more regularly, that they all say he's been terrific with them. So the connection with Dean and I, as you mentioned, we're both from Birmingham, but even deeper, we're actually from the same town in the city of Birmingham as well. And so Birmingham is the second biggest city in England, and it's a big area. It's a big, wide area. The downtown area is huge, but it's still walkable. I've often said I think it's probably best comparable and akin to Chicago, maybe. The downtown's big enough, but it's not gargantuan where you can't walk around,
Right.
And so that's the comparison. I think Birmingham's kind of like Chicago, and it's also on the water as well in terms of being on the canals and what have you. Dean Smith's family and my family are from the town on the outskirts of Birmingham called Great Bar, and it's where I was born and raised. And to my understanding, it's where he was born and raised as well. And his family and my family drink in the same local pub. It's a local pub called the Scott Arms. And I know my mom for sure has spoken to his relatives in the pub over the last couple of years, especially since Dean took the Aston Villa job as well. There was a lot more conversations happening then for obvious reasons, because most people in that area are Aston Villa fans. And so, that's the crazy thing. Like, I remember when the first Charlotte game I had this year was at Red Bull New York, and when we're doing the Zoom meetings that we do every week with the head coaches, I'd spoken to Dean before when he was the head coach at Villa, and Villa came to Minnesota to do a pre-season, and we had exchanged pleasantries then and got to know each other a little bit. And so I didn't expect him to remember that. That was a long time ago. But when I reminded him that I'm the boy from Great Bar, instantly his face kind of lit up and was just like, oh, yeah, how you doing? And so I'd love to get some proper time with Dean at some stage, maybe have a cup of tea with him or something. But it's just, like I said, I've been quite unfortunate. I've only done 2 Charlotte games all year, so I'd love to do some more. I've not actually been to Charlotte, actually. I've never been to the stadium either. So would love to do that at some stage. And I'm sure Dean Smith would be able to point me in the direction of the best tea in the land.
Oh, definitely. We got several others that could do that too. Speaking of that, you said you followed Villa, of course, being a fan from there. So Ashley Westwood, what do you got to say about him?
Ashley Westwood, the connection I have there is an old friend of mine at school who was a youth player with Crewe Alexandra. And for those unaware, Crewe Alexandra, third-tier team in England, but they have this impeccable record of developing players. Their academy is so well known in the UK, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you go and look at it, you will be astounded the amount of youth players that have gone from the academy at Crewe Alexandra up to the Premier League and in the Championship, and the amount of players they've developed is amazing. But my friend Sean from high school, he was a Crewe Alexandra youth team player alongside Ashley Westwood. And so I've never met Ashley Westwood, but it was crazy then when he came to Aston Villa and did so well. And I know a lot of Villa fans are always very, very thankful for his services to the football club. But what a signing he's been for Charlotte. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do remember his passing range and record, and in terms of successful passes into the final third and everything was impeccable. If it's not going through Melonda and Privet, it's going through him when he's dropping in between the two centre halves. So the game that I did was it against Houston. It was clear that Charlotte really missed it. And sometimes you're a little bit sceptical, aren't you, when players are 34, as Ashley Westwood is. You kind of think, how are they going to be in this modern day version of Major League Soccer when it's so transition based and back and forth? But he's fit in perfectly, and I think it's been a sensational signing for Charlotte.
Well, I think Charlotte FC would love to have you at the stadium and not for a road match, because both of those were their last 2 losses. So
yes, that's right. Yeah, I've not done a Charlotte win. You're right. The first game I did actually was the playoff game last year, which was also at Red Bull. That was the first time I'd seen Charlotte. So I've never done a Charlotte win, actually. So apologies if I'm the bad luck, but I'd love to do a game at Charlotte for sure.
Definitely. Well, we'll have to get together, get you hooked up with Dean when you're here. Any other connections with people at Charlotte that we may not know about? Or
yeah, so the other one is a really interesting connection as well. So I can't remember his official title, but it's essentially the player liaison. Is a chap called Spencer Rieger, and he looks after a lot of the players when they move to Charlotte, makes them feel comfortable, helps them find homes, and works a lot on the business side of Charlotte FC, and has been vital to that organisation since they came into existence, and really helped them transition into Major League Soccer, because I crossed paths with him when he was working at Sporting Kansas City, and he certainly helped me settle for sure. Showed me some really good places in Kansas City. And remember at the time, Nick, I was 21 when I moved over, so I was really a deer in headlights. And this chap, Spencer, was a few years older than me and really helped me settle into Kansas City very, very well. So I'm always going to be very grateful to him and the other chap, Dan Dralick, and that group that really helped me settle into life there. But yeah, Spencer, I saw him actually in Houston. Finally, we were able to catch up and have a good couple of hours together in Houston with the away game recently over the last couple of weeks. And I hadn't seen him properly for, must have been 10 years. We had a brief conversation at the playoff game, but it was good to sit down and have a beer with him and actually catch up. So, like I said, I'm not sure of his exact role, the role, the title of the role, but from everything he's explained to me, it's essentially a player liaison, and he'd be a good person to talk to.
Yeah, super important when you have people from out of town.
Yeah, honestly, Nick, his story is wonderful as well. So he'd be a good person to have on the pod at some stage. He is full of stories, and I'm sure, given your audience as well, he would be very, very, very intriguing to listen to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, well, let's turn to your career. Not the traditional footballer to commentator route that we see in some areas. You also are not a university learned journalist. You kind of just came up through the ranks, just got in there and got your feet wet 16 started doing that. You knew you wanted to be a part of football. What interested you on the commenting part? And of course, now you're doing hosting, but still, like, what made you want to be on that part? Whereas there are millions of other types of positions. We just mentioned a couple. What made you go this route?
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I appreciate you mentioning that I'm now hosting as well. But I'll be totally honest, Nick, and I've been honest to everybody when I say this. I enjoy the studio work. It's quite fun. I enjoy being in front of camera. But I'm a commentator. I'm a play-by-play commentator. I would much rather be sent to Timbuktu to commentate on a game than anchor some studio coverage. You know, that's what I want to do, and that's what I have done and what I am doing. But the first interest really was when I realised I wasn't good enough to play. You know, I played traditionally sort of Sunday league and what have you. You know, was just never. I could read the game quite well, but I was never quick enough to execute. I played as a centre half, and so from a visual perspective, where I could see the game quite well, and I felt as though my grasp of reading the game was quite good. And I remember often timing tackles quite well, just because I could read body language and could see when someone moved their hips. I could see where a pass was going and stuff like that. But ultimately, I just wasn't good enough, basically. And so originally for me, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to go into the editorial side of it and go that route. And I actually did shadow a journalist when I was 14, 15 maybe, I think.
Wow.
And just because I kind of knew, I was very, very fortunate, Nick. I was really fortunate that my parents are very driven people. And my dad owned and operated one of, if not the most successful graphics design firms in the UK. Did very, very well for himself. And my mom helped him build the whole thing up. And
do you have some graphic design skills?
No, I can't draw. That's all. So it was,
you draw with your mouth.
Exactly. It was so funny, Nick, because over the years, especially when I was a teenager and, you know, at school in England, they start to sort of not pressure you, but start to think like, all right, what do you want to do and stuff. Mm-hmm. The amount of people that said to me, oh, well, you'll be okay because you're just going to your dad's company. And so first and foremost, I thought to myself, well, that's a cop-out. That's not what I want to. I don't want to live my life that way. You know, I actually want to go and earn something. But the biggest problem was I can't draw. So it was hopeless, me really thinking about that. And so he did very well for himself, my dad did. And I'm incredibly proud of him and what my mum built because it gave me opportunities that I'm assuming others wouldn't have had moving forward as well. It also gave them connections in various different parts of the world. My dad at one stage was working in South Africa on a big project, and you know he's done some work in Spain, and they've both worked really, really hard. And so that's where I get my sort of work ethic and drive from initially, anyway, for sure. And so I mean, I wanted to go into the written route at one stage, and so it was then that suggested to me, why don't you try the journalistic thing? You know, you're obviously. They very lightheartedly told me you're not very good, so why don't you try and stay in football another way? And so I took a little bit of interest in the physiotherapist side as well, and the medical side, and I took a little bit of that in school in England. When you finish high school in England, you finish at the age of 16, and you do 2 years of higher education. And you know, school then is interesting in England because you kind of sort of left to your own divides, really, then, in the sense of it's a lot like what I'm assuming university is here. You have to get to class in your own sort of your own.
You kind of narrow your track
for sure.
Time.
Yeah, and so I did that, and my thought was maybe I'll go into the medical side of it because I was quite interested in it. But then my dad had a contact at the local radio station in Birmingham called BRNB, was what it was called at the time. I think it's just rebranded back to it actually. And I was 15, just about to turn 16. Mm-hmm. And I went into the radio station and listened to all the sights and sounds of radio within a radio station. And instantly was hooked. Yeah. Instantly. I hadn't even met anybody. And I was just like, yeah, this is it. I just felt a buzz instantly, Nick. And so I was allowed to shadow for that day. And I remember seeing how, and I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but I remember seeing how the tape was cut. It was physical tape.
Right.
To kind of cut that would then digitally move onto the computer. It was right on that cusp of going from the old tape to the digital sort of age. And so I remember doing that and seeing that, and then heading into the producer's control room, and I remember him seeing the scores coming in. It's a chap called Cozy Powell, who I will forever, but both he and Andy Davies I will always owe a tremendous amount of gratitude to, because without them I'm not here today. I remember the scores coming through, and Cozy was saying, this guy scored, and then there was a chap playing for Portsmouth at the time, a Zimbabwe international called Benjani Muramwari. Later went on to play for Manchester City and a few others, but the producer essentially had no idea who it was, didn't know who it was, and so then me being a bright-eyed sort of 15, 16-year-old said, oh, well, it's Benjani Muramwari, he does this, and this, he's got this many goals and this many games, blah, blah, blah. And he just turned to me and he said, well, do you want to come in a bit more often? Do you want a job here? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And so that was the start of everything for me in radio, really. I then, alongside my 2 years of higher education in England, worked at the radio station for free on the weekend. I just did it to get internal reps, if you will. And before I knew it, I was controlling soundboards. I was answering the phone for the football phone-in. I was editing as quickly as anybody has. And I really enjoyed it. It was great. And that was my initial...
I was going to say, did you do like commentary reports like on the games throughout the week?
So what happened was, Nick, I did that for about 2 years, and it was clear that I wasn't going to get an opportunity because I was too young. I was coming up to my 17th, up to my 18th birthday, so I was 17, and the radio station was too big. They weren't going to put a 17-year-old on the air, and I, at the time I was irritated, but now obviously you look back and you understand why. So I actually, through this very driven sort of way of operating, was constantly reaching out to people and trying to see if there was any sort of opportunities elsewhere. And there was a smaller radio station in a city called Wolverhampton, just outside of Birmingham, called Beacon Radio. And they had two separate radio stations. They had the main Beacon Radio that was distributing local commentary for Wolves, West Brom, and Walsall in the third tier. And then they had the other station, which was called Shropshire's Beacon Radio. And Shropshire, for those unaware, is a little region just to the west of Birmingham. It's a lovely, quaint and quiet little place that's sort of on the border with Wales. And they had a professional team. They had Shrewsbury Town. And they also had a semi-professional team called Telford United. And so I remember going in just to see, again, just shadow, just to see what was going on. There's a chap called Stu Haycock who sent me on the day I was supposed to be in studio. He just turned to me and said, do you want to go to a game today? I said, yeah, I'd love to. And I went with a reporter who's sadly no longer with us, George Andrews, who, again, I owe so much to George and Stu because, again, without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I kind of, shadowed what it would be like to be a reporter / commentator. And so, like I said, I'm 17 at this point, Nick, and I'm just taking it all in, being a sponge. And eventually, after a couple of, I think it was about a month or two, actually, they said to me, we need you to go and do a game. We need you to go and report on a game.
Were you scared?
And, which one, sorry?
Were you scared?
Yeah, I was absolutely beyond petrified, yeah. All I could think of, and I remember it like it was yesterday, it was a Conference North game between Gainsborough Trinity and AFC Telford United. So what was happening is the main commentary was being done at Shrewsbury Town, wherever they were playing, and I think George was doing the commentary, and he would throw to me every sort of, 15 minutes or so for an update, and he'd be like, here, Shrewsbury Town, it's Shrewsbury 1, Port Vale 0, let's see how Telford United are getting on. Here's your reporter, Callum Williams. And then I would give a 30-second blurb or something, about what's going on. Excuse me. And, excuse me. Got a lot of bugs right now because of travelling. And so what happened then, as I say, would be I would deliver a 30-second sort of blurb as to what's going on. Nick, I was petrified. I was so nervous because I'd sampled enough of the industry to know that it was exactly what I wanted to do. And so it became an obsession, really. And I must have done okay because they then put me on air for the rest of the season. And it was good. And then so what happened then, to cut a long story short, I was continuously, again, reaching out to people looking for freelance work here and there as I was in my higher education and moving out of it, thinking I've got to get a job. What happened to me then was I think I made an impression on somebody because I had finished the season with Beacon Radio, and I finished the season unbelievably, by the way, Nick, because I had commentated on AFC Telford United in the Conference North final against Gateshead. And then a few days after, I was a reporter for the League Two playoff final at Wembley.
Wow.
Shrewsbury Town lost, I think. I can't remember who they lost to, but that was my very first year as a commentator and reporter. I was at Wembley. I couldn't believe it. And so, like I said, I think I must have made an impression on someone, because what happened to me then was that the BBC in Shrewsbury, the local radio station, BBC Radio Shropshire, they actually approached me and said, we've got this tremendous, essentially like an apprenticeship, a traineeship course thing that lasts about a year. And we'd like you to apply and consider being a sports broadcast journalist. And so obviously I did. I jumped at it and I got in. I think it was, there was something like, I think it's something like 52 radio stations in the country. And there was like 8,000 people applied. And I got one of the spots. I was fortunate enough to get one of those spots. And then on the same day that Radio Shropshire said to me, come in for what was called BBC Blast, I was also given the fortune to be, I don't know if I was approached, but suddenly had a conversation with BBC Radio Sheffield. And they said, we need a reporter. And we know you've got experience. Can you go up and down the country and do things like, mainly can you go up and down the country and follow Chesterfield in League Two? And so, here's me, 18 at the time, thinking, yeah, absolutely, of course. So I'm 18 and I'm being signed by the BBC is perhaps a little too much, but certainly being used by them.
Right.
But
you were getting paid for it.
For sure, yeah. And I also did my first commentary though, Nick, before I joined the BBC. It was Telford United away at Alfreton Town. Alfreton is a small little village in, I think, East Derbyshire. And I'll also remember getting the train over there, expecting to do reports, and producer Stu calls me on the train and he said, I'm going to need you to do commentary today. There's some technical issues at Shrewsbury. And the commentary area was this tiny little box, maybe about 10 feet by 5 feet maybe. And the window wasn't in line with somebody if they're standing up. So I had to do the commentary sort of hunched over in this tiny little stadium that there was maybe 800 people at the ground maybe. But it was great. I was 17 when I did my first ever commentary. And then, like I said, all of the above happened, then the BBC stuff and everything. And so I joined the BBC when I was 19. And that, for me, Nick, the next 2 years were beyond valuation in the sense of it was such an amazing learning curve. And I was brought on into the BBC by a chap called Charles Runcie, who, for whatever reason, had tremendous belief in me and still does to this day whenever I talk to him. But there's a guy called Paul Walker, who, again, owes so much to. Paul is now a world feed commentator, and you'll probably hear him a lot doing the Football League whenever you're watching in the US. He was my boss at Radio Sheffield and gave me the opportunity. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it's that was a tremendous opportunity to listen and learn and be a sponge, and to take in everything from a BBC point of view. So I may not be university trained, but I am BBC trained, and I think there's something to be said about that. I love radio. And the art of broadcasting football on the radio, I absolutely adore it. And it's a huge medium and a huge way of people to absorb their team in the UK because of the television rights restrictions. Radio is massive. And so there's almost an element of responsibility because people are listening because they've got no other way of hearing their team. Right. Now, things have changed slightly with the iPlayer model and what have you, but still, whenever I go home, it's still people traditionally listen to the radio. Radio is a huge thing for people back home. And so I hope one day we get to that stage in this country because I think it's unbelievably undervalued here. I myself had listened to the radio, particularly the BBC Radio 5 Live, as a kid for years and years and years, very much emulating my dad. And I'd be in my room as a teenager playing video games or whatever, and I would always have Radio 5 Live on. And still to this day, I'm influenced by radio commentators more than I am television commentators, which is interesting because I'm primarily now a television commentator. I haven't done a radio commentary for nearly 2 years, 3 years even. But there are several that really influenced me growing up. And one of them was just actually on the Fox coverage, Darren Fletcher. He was a regular on 5 Live when I was growing up. But John Murray, who is still the senior football commentator on BBC 5 Live, is arguably my biggest influence, especially in the earlier years as well. So so what I did is I kind of just trying to emulate him really in that moment, and just try and be a football commentator, try and sound like a football commentator, try and sound convincing, And so I must have done okay, because, like I said, it wasn't the last commentary I did there. And like I said, before I knew it, I was working with the BBC.
Well, I think radio is, like you said, is a much different medium, and you really have to paint the picture well. And so that means you have to have the language, you have to have things going in, not just stories, but facts and other stuff, because things are happening, but you got to be able to put that whole picture together for someone, because they're not even, like you said, they can't see it. Whereas on TV, a lot of times you don't hear a commentator for a couple seconds, because it's like there's really nothing going on, but
well, they don't need to as well.
Right.
The pictures do the talking. I mean, if the ball is in the centre circle now, let's say if I'm doing Charlotte versus, I don't know, Red Bull, right? And I would, let's say the ball comes in from the right-hand side is Nathan Byrne on the halfway line. So I would say Nathan Byrne on the halfway line, right-hand side, moves it inside to the centre circle for Ashley Westwood. Goalless after 10 minutes between Charlotte and Red Bull New York. If I'm on television, I would say Byrne, Westwood.
Right.
And just move on.
Right. You're guiding rather than painting the story. Yeah, that's really interesting. But I do agree with you. I do enjoy the radio and using the language to really understand. Now, I read some things about you as far as like your kind of style and what you do to prep and things. So first of all, I know you don't really have any like catchphrases for your calls. It's kind of just spontaneous in the moment, but just thinking, is it true you take about 3 days to prepare? You kind of prepare a broadcast card, facts, depth charts, things like that?
Yeah, I'm assuming like most commentators do. And the good thing about this, Nick, is there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever makes you feel comfortable. And so this weekend I am on CF Montreal versus Atlanta United. And I was fortunate that I did Montreal last weekend. So I can take notes from last weekend's game and plot certain parts of them into this with regards to individual player preparation. I always think it's important to, I know people kind of have, in this country, I've noticed a lot of people sort of have their boards and they write a couple of sentences about said player and that's it, they have it for the season. That's if that makes them comfortable, then that's great. That's their way of doing it. But for me, I often feel like every game is potentially a new story and a new chapter. So it may take me a bit longer, but I will handwrite every single player, and I use the little post-it notes, and I put them out on a sort of on a folder, and I have half the folder that has statistical information and generic information with regards to the match itself. The other half will have the formation, where I can label in a formation the individual players, and I know that the information is there about them. But for example, as I said, I did Montreal Vancouver last week. A great game, really entertaining back and forth. But preparing Joseph Martinez's stats and his label versus Vancouver is extraordinarily different from the prep and information that should be said about him versus Atlanta United. So this is why I go back every single time and I rewrite everything. And like I said, maybe there's a better way of doing it. Maybe there's more of an efficient way or a quicker way of doing it. But for me, I find doing it that way really, really helps because it lodges things into the memory as well. There's times, Nick, when I won't look down at my notes because I know, for example, the next goal, I'm telling you right now, I don't have it in front of me, the next goal for Joseph Martinez is goal 109 in the MLS regular season. If he does that, he moves into 8 full time over Jason Kreis. And so that's lodged into my mind right now because I've written it down.
Right. It's the process that really helps you. Yeah.
For sure. But also as well with regards to commentary and style and stuff like that, that's very interesting, that note that I've just said. But it has to be the right time to be put in. We can't just... Like that sentence there took me a good 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long, long time during the course of a football match and the commentary on television. So I think at times, there's a tendency for commentators to press that sort of information when I don't think it's necessarily needed. I know right now, Nick, as I said, as I prepare for Montreal Atlanta, I'm doing all this prep, which will take me about 2 days. Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to use about 10% of it. Right. Because the important part is what's happening on the pitch. That's the most important part. And if I don't get to a piece of information that I know has taken me days to find, then so be it. It didn't work. There was one I remember I did the Canadian Derby. I did Toronto Montreal earlier this year. And I remember it was something along the lines of, it was Jonathan Osorio came on the field, or was coming off the field, or one of the two. And he was, actually, do you know what it was? It wasn't Montreal. It was Toronto versus Sporting Kansas City. And I remember it because Jonathan Osorio came on the field because he was being spoken to by Terry Dunfield. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, and doing the prep on this, that Jonathan Osorio made his MLS debut against Sporting Kansas City in 2013. As he came on the field, he was replaced by Terry Dunfield, or he replaced Terry Dunfield. And so that's an interesting little story, a little factoid for that moment. Right. But we didn't get to it because there was something else happening at the other end of the field. There was players that squared up or something. And that's okay, right. Because you have to focus on what's in front of you. I often find sometimes with commentary all around the world, not just in this country, but all around the world, that there are people that are fascinated with getting their stories in. And I understand it's important to tell a story, but we can't force a story.
That's interesting. Now, besides that prep, some of the other things you do, I notice you use a lip ribbon microphone. Do you have your own that you carry with you, or is it provided?
I do have my own. Is this going to be video or audio, Nick?
We'll use some video, yeah. Okay,
well, let me show you then. So, all right, so first and foremost, if it's going to be video, let me just go back to the notes. Okay. So this was my prep for Montreal versus Vancouver, and it's got all sorts of scribbles and what have you on it, but essentially...
Do colors mean anything?
I think the red is a little more significant. Okay. If I can get to it, great. Like I always put what the coaches say down in red, but I've got generic stats up here, attacking stats, defensive stats, and then other. And other is, a factoid of maybe it's this fixture. So, for example, Vancouver Whitecaps here, it's something along the lines of the Vancouver 86ers until 73. They came in and played the Whitecaps then. They played as the Whitecaps, NASL champions. They played the Montreal Manic, all that kind of stuff. That's that sort of stuff, what the other is for. And then it'll be things like, like Vanni Sartini talking about pressing triggers, and I'll underline that. So my co-coms, Kalen Carr, can see where we're going. And then, as I said, we've got little facts about each individual player. And then when a substitution is made, I can just quickly grab that, stick it on, and it's all good to go. Right. So that's all that.
And you have just as many details and stuff about the subs when needed.
Correct. I mean, look, the subs are all here. These are the ones that weren't used. and they won't be used, and that's fine. Right. The people that are trying to save the planet are going to hate me because I waste so much paper, It's awful. But in terms of the lip mic, I have it right here, yes. So I travel around with this little trusty case.
Nice.
Keeps it protected. And there it is, lip mic.
Nice.
And it has a cover on it because I think when it doesn't have a cover on the front, it can sound a little bit distorted. So the cover goes in the front and it just rests on your lip like this.
Yeah.
And you can go as high or as low as you want. And these are, as I'm sure you're aware, Nick, are very, very, very common in the UK. And the reason for that is because of going back to my love of radio. I would be sitting in the UK now, if I was doing a commentary on the radio, I'd be sitting amongst the fans, essentially. There's these tables and desks that are the media area, essentially. And you have radio and you have newspapers and everything. Television has its own area, the gantry, as we call it, and I still stupidly call the booth the gantry from time to time. But the reason why this is so hard pressed towards my lip is because this is designed to take in only this bit here. Mm-hmm. It's only designed to take in the front part of the mic. And it's actually genius because you imagine you've got 3 or 4 radio stations on the same row. The last thing you want to do is be picking up someone else's commentary. So that's what the specificity of these mics are designed for, is to keep out outside noise. And I love it. And it's just a comfort factor for me now as well. Like I've done hundreds of games on just a headset, and it's not a problem.
Right.
But if I can, and it's preferable to the production, we had an issue. We did a game at Red Bull earlier this year. There was technical issues and the mic didn't work, so I did it on headset. No problem.
Right.
But my preference is always I will always use the lip mic, because I also think it sounds much smoother as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard commentaries before where it's obvious they're on a headset because there's a slight distortion to it. There's a slight distorted sound. But with these, I've never heard that before.
I notice those who like to talk with their hands a lot. I can imagine like Eric Krakauer, who's very animated and he's moving his hands around a lot when he's doing this.
Yes.
I don't know if he could do a lip mic.
No, probably not. I tend to be a little more reserved when I'm in the booth and trying to be a bit more controlled, because my style is... what's the best way to describe my style? Organised chaos, maybe. Just... a little bit wild at times when chances are happening and goals are happening. My volume tends to go up quite significantly. But maybe that's because I'm not using my hands and giving energy in certain parts of the body. I don't know, but that's, yeah.
it's channeled up here. Speaking of organized chaos, can you tell about the organized chaos of the raccoon call?
Well, I don't know if we can identify it as organized chaos, because Nick, it was so bizarre. Callum and I, we'd just come off the back of calling Lionel Messi and Miami and Montreal. Spent a lot of time in Montreal this year, now that I think about it, which is great. Love that place. But we'd just done Messi and Miami and Montreal. And so we were sort of preparing. It was a week where there was 3 games in 7 days. It was rivalry week, I believe, because then afterwards we did Toronto, Montreal. And so we were doing Philadelphia, NYCFC. And at the time, Philly, well, they're floundering right now, aren't they? But at the time, it was very uncharacteristic. They hadn't lost that amount of games in their history, to my understanding, from what I can remember from that game. But so there was a tension in the air for sure. Philly and New York City don't like each other anyway, just with regards to any sort of sports, any sort of context, really. They just don't seem to like each other. And so there was animosity for sure in the air. You could feel there was tackles flying in. And it was a rivalry game for sure. And I remember looking down at my notes for something. The ball had gone out of play, and I'm looking down at my notes at something. And I'm quite active on my talk back to the producer, and I'll try and give the truck a heads up as to where I'm going to potentially go next. So the director can say to the camera crew, okay, he's going to go here, shoot this guy, shoot this guy, shoot this person, have this person on camera 12, this person on camera 10, like get everything ready, I'm quite, and I don't know if that's because of my initial introduction to the industry and the production side of it. I think a lot about that sort of stuff. And so anyway, I was looking down, talking to the producer, and all of a sudden the producer's name is Jordan Strauss, who is a tremendous producer and a regular in Philadelphia, as he should be. And he just said to me, he said, "There's a raccoon on the field." And I just glared up, and it was tremendous timing, Nick. As I looked up, I caught the raccoon mid sort of jumping off the advertising board onto the pitch, and he was kind of like mid sort of like jump, and his arms were out. He was like one of those squirrels that fly, like he just jumped out. And I remember just still being on talkback going, oh, all right then. And then identifying, as the cameras did, that there is indeed a raccoon on the field. And what was hilarious was just the amount of time it took to remove the raccoon. We've all been at football matches in the past where, especially in England, where there's a cat that roams across the field, there's a fox or whatever. But I'd never seen an animal remain on the field as long as that raccoon did. And, I mean, he was wandering with such swagger and confidence, wasn't he? I mean, darting in and around players. And so I think at that point, and I must stress as well, tremendous stuff from Callum Carr then as well, because Callum is very, very new to commentary. Yes, he's done studio work for years and he's done these tremendous documentary type things and podcasts, but it's a completely different skill doing live commentary. And, he's only been doing it 18 months. And so at that point, I wasn't sure how he was going to handle it. And he handled it impeccably. And we both just sort of went with it and started commentating on it. And because what else are we going to do? we're not going to talk about the game that's been halted. Let's, is it that sort of moment where you shift from sports commentator to National Geographic commentator?
Right.
I don't know. For me, from an editorial point of view, then, and a journalistic point of view, you just start describing what's in front of you. And I would have done exactly the same on the radio. It was insane in the sense of none of the players wanted anything to do with it. Obviously, the Philadelphia players were irritated because they were losing. The New York City FC players were scared of getting bit or something. I think it was Matt Freed was the closest player to the raccoon, and he absolutely bolted, was not interested at all. And yeah, like I said, the raccoon then just wandered around and thought about going out one end of the field, came back to the other, and sort of darted around a couple of workers at the stadium and operations crew at Subaru Park. And eventually they got him. And I remember just saying, like, they got him. They got the raccoon, laughing. And then afterwards as well, it was interesting because going through like the techniques of how to preserve the raccoon that they've just captured. Like, they've got to make sure they get this angle correct now, otherwise the raccoon's going to get out of this little gap. And again, we just went for it, Nick. And I've done so many interviews about this thing, and I get people from overseas, like it was all over the news in England. It was all over the place in Australia. I got a friend that lives in the Middle East, said it was on the stations there.
Did you get lots of calls like after that? They wanted to talk to you?
So many, Nick. Yeah. And I kind of said no to a lot of them just because, I understand people want to tell the story and everything, but just, it just kind of felt a little bit silly, like
right. Like this is being made a big deal out of something that just happened.
Right, exactly. So I kind of didn't want to make a big deal of it, to be honest. But it was the same for Callum. Got so many calls, and it was by far the most bizarre moment I've ever had on live television.
All right. Well, you had another interesting moment. I don't know if your connections or if you're allowed to talk about this. Did you work on a Wrexham show?
Oh, I think I can talk about it. Yeah. If not, we'll have you edit it out. I think we're okay. Yeah, that just came out of nowhere. That did. I was prepping for a game as per usual, and the producer just reached out to me, or one of several producers, a guy called Michael in Los Angeles, reached out and he said, "Look, we're a huge fan of your voice. We love you as a commentator. Would you consider, doing some dubbing and some commentary for some things that we need for the final episode?" And I said, yeah, it kind of, because of the magnitude of it, I said, I think you probably talk to my agent and everything, but it all went very smoothly. And as far as I'm aware, they were very happy with it. And I can't say much more, but there's more to come for sure.
Right, right.
And we had some very good conversations. And so we'll wait and see. But that whole thing has been incredible to see the rise in popularity of Wrexham. I love the Football League, Nick. Given my background, as I've just explained, and where I sort of came from, I've always loved the Football League. Sometimes, in fact, a lot of the times, more so than the Premier League, which does get a gasp or two in the US and Canada at times because of the immense popularity of the Premier League. But I love the Football League, and I'm always consistently watching it. And so to be involved in a project like that, albeit the smallest, most minute part, it was such a thrill. It was really such a thrill. And so I hope we get to do something similar again. And like I said, as far as I'm aware, Rob and Ryan and all the production team were very happy, and we'll just see what happens moving forward.
You just do what you can do, right?
Exactly.
That's cool. Now, some other things we were talking about just in your kind of prep and what you do. You talked about like you're going to be going to Montreal this weekend. I'm sure you're going to have like the big group meeting, but are you going to kind of go on public transportation, as I've heard you've done, and just kind of get a feel for the fans, or go out to a pub just to get an idea of where they're feeling about the match and the team?
Yeah, I will try and do things like that, normal things as often as I can, Nick. The pub may be a little bit tricky this time because I don't get in until late this time, unfortunately, but I'll certainly go and wander around a coffee shop and just try and gauge what people are saying. And Montreal's a great place to do that because football is so popular. There's a real lust for the game in Montreal. So I love going up there and doing games. And, it's hard at times as well because a lot of the time, obviously, it's a French-speaking province. So a lot of people are speaking French, which I don't. But there are times when, I'll absolutely listen into people. And it's kind of creepy, actually, now that I think about it. But just sitting in a coffee shop and listening to people talking about, well, what do they think Laurent Courtois is going to do with the formation? How do you think Joseph Martinez is going to do with going up against this centre half or whatever, And then someone will have an opinion like, I think we should go forward at the back today or something. Or I love that. That's football at its purest, when people are sitting around away from the sport itself and just talking about it. That's culture. That's football culture, and I love that. We will more than likely take the public transport, if not to the stadium, we'll certainly take it after the stadium. But I, again, just to hear what people have said about the game and stuff. But there was a spell last year for sure when, over my time at Minnesota United, I would always get public transport just to hear what people had to say about, at the time, what Adrian Heath was going to do with the centre forward, what their opinion was about certain things. And, and so this year's been a little bit more tricky just because of the cities that we've operated in. But I will always try and find a way to be involved in the generic conversation amongst the fans of that team. Because for me, Nick, fans are the perennial driver of football. Without the fans, there's nothing. And we saw that. We got a prime example of that during COVID, doing the games to empty stadiums. I mean, look, it was awful. It was terrible. And for good reason, obviously, there was a reason why nobody was there. But we did get a glimpse of what football was like without fans. It was terrible. And so I often say this, Nick, that I will always do whatever I can to respect or involve the fans in any way, shape or form. And I hope I did that in Kansas City and in Minnesota, particularly given I was at the clubs for so long. But without them, there's nothing. Without the fans, there's absolutely no heart, no soul, no nothing. It's just an empty stadium with a bunch of corporate people watching a bunch of lads kick a leather ball around. It's not.
Yeah.
The fans are the heartbeat of the sport, and they always will be. And so I will always remain incredibly respectful to whatever the fan base is. Sometimes we're not always going to agree, and that's fine. That's part and parcel of football. It is what it is. But the one thing that I would always say is that I have so much respect for the fans in North America, because sometimes it's hard being a fan here. Soccer isn't readily available on every TV and every bar. You have to go and ask. You have to, you have to make an effort to be a fan sometimes in this country. Now, it's getting better now, for sure. It's certainly changed since when I first came over to the country in 2011. But, to be a fan here, it's a lot harder than other parts of the world. And so I will always remain incredibly respectful to the fans. We'll always make time if somebody wants to have a cup of tea or a beer or whatever. Like, I will always try and be around fans. And I'm not the only one saying that. I'm sure that's the same with everyone that you've interviewed. But the fans are imperative. And if we are going to grow this sport in this part of the world, it simply comes down to the fans. It's simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was at Copa last night, and Colombian fans were amazing.
Amazing. How was it? Tell me everything.
It was a sea of yellow. I mean, they just took over the whole stadium. It was amazing. The passion and just the constant, you see this, like when you're watching Euros and stuff like that, you see like all the orange from Netherlands and of course England fans in every pub and area. You don't get that, of course, in the States as much. It's kind of in pockets. And, for this town, the city of Charlotte, to have that and have that kind of feeling of that, that international hard beating match between kind of two rivals, it was really pretty magical to be there.
As we've said, it all comes down to the fans, Nick. We can bring in star players, which help, of course. We know that we can do these monstrous television deals and all this kind of stuff. This all helps, but ultimately it comes down to the fans. And when there's the so-called Euro snobs around who don't want to watch MLS and stuff, European football, I say to them, well, the best thing you can do is go and watch a game, because your backside on a seat is putting money into the football club. Doesn't matter how much, how little. And that's an investment into the football club, who are then going to go and reinvest that in many different ways to make the product better. And so, I must admit, I love conversing a Euro snob. I really, really do. I try and do it a lot, because a lot of when we're in cars in different parts of North America, different Ubers and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the Uber drivers are not from the US or Canada,
Right.
And they have their European teams and stuff. I said, great, brilliant. But have you watched Charlotte? Have you watched Toronto? Have you watched Red Bull? And they'll say no. And I'll often try and see if I can get some tickets, whether it's for them or whether it's for people that haven't been to an MLS game.
Mm-hmm.
Because I more often than not, they instantly will text me or message me and say, yeah, you were right. You were right. I said, yeah, because it's football. It's live football. It doesn't matter that it's not the Premier League or whatever. Just because MLS is not the Premier League doesn't mean it's a bad league.
Right. Style's different. Some quality's different, but it's still two clubs, people going after it.
It's live football. And like I said, I think the more people at the games, the better, obviously. But I love converting the people that haven't watched football in this country. But I'm as I said earlier on, just so appreciative of those that have been doing this for a long time, even, back in the day, in the 90s and everything. Because again, without them, we may not even be where we are right now, that they have helped what they've done in terms of accumulating the culture and making the supporter sections and stuff what they are now. Without them, again, this league isn't what it is.
Yeah, well, you definitely have to come to Charlotte. Now, do you do commentating at home, like for your child, or do you turn it off?
No, I don't. I have not thought of that before, but now maybe I will. As she's running around, she's just started kicking a ball around. Maybe there's an opportunity to commentate on my daughter. Who knows? But I hadn't thought of that. But now maybe I will.
I didn't know if that was like a little practice. You're kind of working some things out.
No, but like I said, I'll consider it now, especially when we take the ball over to the park here and start kicking it around. There we go. I'll have you to thank for that, Nick.
Yeah. I don't know if I want to be thanked for that. Your daughter's like, oh no.
Yeah.
All you can do is comment about what I'm doing. So if you didn't take this career path, what would you have gone to?
I think I would have gone down the coaching route or the physiotherapist route, or maybe the written journalist route, like I said. But in terms of careers away from football, I'm often fascinated with interior design. I really like how the inside of places look, not really too concerned about the outside. But we just remodeled our kitchen here in New York, and I love it. And it's exactly what we wanted. And my wife will get all the credit because she designed everything and made it look the way it is. But I am often stepping back in our living room and looking and thinking, well, maybe this would be better there, or maybe this angle is more appropriate for this thing, So I think maybe I would have gone down that route. I worked with my dad's company for a little bit when I was in that higher education period that I mentioned earlier on. When I was at the radio station, I worked with my dad just for a bit of money as an assistant photographer, and I really enjoy the photography side of things as well. So again, that's down to different angles and stuff. And when we had the US game in Kansas City the other day, and the camera angle is what it is, I nearly had a heart attack. Just little things like that. So I enjoy photography. I enjoy the little details of that. But it would have been something artistic. I think I'm not one of these people that would have been a mechanic or anything like that. I'm terrible with any sort of home improvement stuff. I'm useless, Nick. That's all my wife. If a shelf needs putting up in this house, it's my wife. We are not that household at all, So it probably would have been something artistic, I'm assuming anyway.
Wow. Well, I want to go kind of touch if you have some time. So you got the call to come over to MLS with Casey. Basically, kind of you, like you said, in other things, kind of came out of nowhere. Somebody messaged you and you're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden you're over in Kansas City. And within a couple of years, didn't they win the MLS Cup while you were there?
They did.
That must have been pretty neat to come right away and be a part of such like a winning atmosphere, because that would be different if you came over and you're like, this one's at the bottom of the league.
It was a very, very special time in my life, Nick, because it was a first real endeavour outside the UK, and I was 21 as well. And, at the time I just went with it, but looking back on it as we have, you don't really realise how much responsibility you have as the voice of a franchise when you're coming from overseas, because obviously that's not how we do things. So first and foremost, to be given that responsibility and to be given it at 21 was absurd, really. But again, I'll always be thankful to the people that gave me the opportunity, because clearly they saw something, and nobody had any idea that it was going to be as successful as it was with the new stadium, and the supporters being as unbelievable as they were, and the new fans that came on board. I mean, that place was sold out every week, and it was the perfect time, really, Nick, because at that time, both the NFL team and the baseball team were awful. And so Kansas City was desperate for something new. And Sporting really, really captured the market wonderfully. And the marketing team at that point deserved unbelievable credit for the way that they manufactured the image of Sporting. It was a cool thing. It was for people that were my age, that were sort of in their mid to late 20s, and in their early 20s and coming out of college and what have you. It was aimed at that age group. It was a cool thing to do. You were seen as cool as if you were going to sporting games. And then they launched the fashion brand as well. And all of a sudden, like, people are wearing Sporting style at bars and stuff. It was transformative. It really was. And so that sort of came out of nowhere. I'll always remember 2010, Christmas Eve. I was prepping for a game, and I had an approach from the San Jose Earthquakes out of nowhere. And my assumption is that I was doing some world feed stuff then alongside the BBC, and they must have heard me, found my details, and approached. And so we had a conversation, and ultimately it didn't work because they thought they couldn't get the visa done in time. No problem. Maybe this is something we'll revisit at a later date. And I spoke to Arlo White about it at the time, because Arlo was, I think, in his second year as the voice of the Sounders. And, I will always owe Arlo a tremendous amount of gratitude as well, because and not that I needed convincing, Nick, but he certainly convinced me to come to the US as well. He said it's only getting bigger and better here. But anyway, the San Jose thing didn't work out. And so I spoke to the chap there and said, look, I'd just like to know where you got my details from and everything. And it was a guy at MLS HQ, was their head of broadcasting at the time, a guy called Larry Tosconia. And so I emailed him saying, look, thanks very much. Really appreciate that. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out, but maybe in the future. And he said to me, have you spoken to anybody in Kansas City? And I said, Larry, where on earth is Kansas City? I had no idea. And so anyway, he put me in touch with the right people. And legitimately, from the first conversation we had, 6 weeks later, I was doing the opening game at Chivas USA and been driven down Sunset Boulevard. And it was quite the first away game to get. And it's a shame, obviously, how Chivas USA ended up in the end. But that was quite the introduction to MLS, because the stadium wasn't ready at the time as well. So I did the first 10 games on the road. So as a 21-year-old going around North America in that way was unbelievable. So I was convinced pretty quickly that this was going to work. And like I said, originally I only signed to the end of the season, and the club wanted to renew, and so we stayed for another 3 years, and it all really changed for me, Nick, in the second year when I met my wife. That's when I really started thinking about the US long term, because I was going to go back to England. I was going to go back to the BBC. Everybody at the BBC gave me such horrific abuse for leaving the BBC, going to America at 21.
Traitor.
They were just like, what are you doing? You're on this trajectory,
Right.
What are you doing? Why are you leaving the BBC? And I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do. I'm a believer of putting yourself in situations where you're outside your comfort zone. And that certainly was. And so I had to do it. I just had to go and do it. And it turned out to be the best decision I ever made.
That's fabulous. Now, you ended up going back, right?
I did, yeah, because Kansas City, to my understanding, wanted a local voice, which is up to them. At the time, I was devastated, if I'll be honest, Nick. I was really, really devastated because I didn't want to leave. There was some interest from another network at the time, and it would have been the right way for me to go in my career. And I think Kansas City, I think they took that as me wanting to leave, and I didn't want to leave. And so that time is a classic example of miscommunication. And there's other little bits in there that I don't really need to go into, but that was a really devastating time in my life, because my wife and I were very settled. Kansas City was home. Right. I still consider Kansas City, at least a part of it, home. It's a place that means a lot to me. And so the club wanted to move on anyway, I think. Like I said, I think they wanted a local voice. And so we went back, and my wife and I went and lived in England for about 2.5 years. My wife took it as an opportunity, and she then did her PhD. and is an incredibly smart cookie, way too smart for me.
She's a chemical engineer, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's what she got her PhD in, and she's the brains of the bunch for sure. And she's an immaculate human being, and I'm hopelessly in love with her. And we have this incredible life now that I'm so thankful for. But she's really in my latter stages of life. She really, in the recent stages of life, has been the driving force for me. Has been the one that's given me confidence and has helped me navigate how to operate in North America for sure, because it is different. And so we went back to England for it's like 2.5 years, and she stayed to finish her PhD, which was, again, it was hard, but we kind of had this short-term pain for long-term gain type attitude towards it. And in England, I ended up going back and working with BBC a little bit on the national programmes, and worked with TalkSport on their Premier League coverage for the international output. I did the Bundesliga, did LaLiga, worked with IMG, a huge production company for those unaware that they control a lot of football. And so I was doing a lot of foreign football. Again, Bundesliga, Eredivisie, La Liga, and then MLS as well. MLS came along, so IMG were producing it for Sky, and they said, "We know you've just come back. Are you interested in still doing the league?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely, I am." And so that meant many late nights in Stockley Park in London doing commentaries with some great characters that, again, I grew up watching. People like David Prutton, Ian Dowie, Alan Kirbishley. I worked for a season with former Portland manager John Spencer, who was a really good lad as well. And so, if I had an itch that needed scratching, that certainly was at that point, because I was live on Sky most weekends doing the MLS stuff. And so, no, that was grand. That was really good. And I did international football then as well with the World Feed and Football League World Feeds. It was great. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. And then I remember being in the pub with my dad watching England's, I think ironically losing to Spain. Let's hope that's not the case on Sunday.
Right.
And I got a note on LinkedIn from a chap called Brad Baker, who was the senior broadcast VP or whatever the title was at Minnesota United. And he said, we'd love to talk to you about being our voice.
And they weren't a MLS franchise at that time.
They were just about to go into MLS. So this was late 2016. And so they came in 2017. And I'll be totally honest, Nick, I was a little bit dismissive at first, because I remember showing my dad, and we were both kind of like, I've done MLS. I still really like it, but, things are going well here and everything, And I showed my wife, and my wife said, just talk to them. Just talk to them and see what they say. And once again, as she often does, fills me with the best advice ever, because it ended up being a game-changing conversation, because the chap, Brad, his vision for television and what they wanted to do, and they were going to do it properly. They were going to travel on the road. They were going to put money into it. It was going to be a real production. Instantly, I got that buzz back for traveling around MLS again and everything. And so,
did you have some agency in the producing of it too, or was it just, hey, you're just going to be a commentator?
All done in-house. It was all done in-house by Minnesota United.
No, I meant as far as like agency and like your own, like, did you have some say into like how things were going to, since it is like the first kind of production of things, were you like, oh, I want to have this happen? And they were like, yeah, let's do that.
I gave input and advice and suggestions when it was appropriate, but I'm one of these, Nick, where I like to stay out of the way. I'll give advice when I think it's appropriate, but it's not about me. It's not my production. These people who were producing it and making it the way it was, but were doing a fantastic job anyway. They didn't need anything from me,
right?
And we put together a really good crew, and eventually it was picked up by Fox Sports North, now Bally Sports North, and they were a good partner as well, and helped out in certain ways. But the majority of it, if not 99% of it, was all done in-house. They obviously hired a production crew to help on match day, and those individuals were wonderful, and still great. I still speak to one or two of them, but the effort that people put into putting that production on, because we all had an understanding, we wanted it to be the best broadcast in the league, and I think at some stage we probably were. We just never really spoke about it. And I had a producer, Morgan Lubin, who was young as well, but ambitious, wanted to do things. And I was fortunate. I worked alongside Kindred D. St. Aubin, who's a tremendous broadcaster, as my co-coms. And we had Jamie Watson operating in a sideline analyst role, and he was sort of fresh from the playing realm. But he wanted to be a broadcaster. You could tell, and having had conversations since, I think he wanted to be a broadcaster more than a player. So, was clearly ready for it, and we took the opportunity to go to training together most days and everything. It was a really good, tight unit. And then I felt as though Kindred, we didn't need much time to bond at all on the air. I remember doing the first game in the club's history at Portland on the radio, which was a thrill for me, as I'm sure you're aware. And I felt like Kindred and I almost hit it off instantly. It didn't feel complicated, And so then moving into the TV part of it, again, it was the same. So I had a great time there. Nick, I had no idea how long I was going to be at Minnesota United. My assumption was, we'll do this 3-year deal and we'll see how it goes. And the new stadium was coming and everything. So, I just kind of thought, I'll put everything into it like I did in Kansas City. I'll run through a brick wall. I'll go to war with these people and we'll try and make this the best franchise possible. I would go out on random Tuesday nights with a pal of mine. I'd convince him, one of the lads from the corporate sales team, Josh, and I'd say, let's go and grab a load of scarves from the marketing room and let's go into different bars and just say, hey, can you hang this up? It's the local soccer team. And they would. And those moments were important in the early stages of the franchise, And so, but eventually the team obviously got very popular. The stadium came about and I ended up staying until the end of 2022. And again, such an impeccable part of my life that I'm always going to look back on. And I love Minneapolis and St. Paul. The Twin Cities are a fantastic place. And especially this time of year in July as well. I don't think there's anywhere in the country that gets better summers.
Yes.
The winters can be a little bit challenging, but you just get used to it. And I'd been used to bad weather anyway growing up in England, so it didn't bother me, but just an impeccable place. And I hope whenever it comes up again, I'm looking forward to getting another game at Allianz Field for sure.
That's cool. All right. Well, got a couple more questions if you got time.
Yes, of course.
All right. What's the scariest thing you've done in your career? Think about all your movements, your back and forth. What's the thing that's just like, I'm scared to death, but I'm still going to do it?
Oh, probably moving to New York.
Really?
18 months ago. Yeah, because I hadn't signed with Apple. Things were looking good, but I hadn't signed anything. And so the reason we came to New York was because my wife got a huge career opportunity. And we knew, Nick, that being in the Northeast for what I do for work is never a bad thing, given where the studios are and what have you. But I think, moving to New York and buying for the first time, and buying in New York is
expensive as anything.
It's insane. Doing all of that with my very, very heavily pregnant wife, who was going to give birth to our first child.
Wow.
That was probably the scariest moment. But also it was like, just do it. Just do it. And we had spoken about moving to different places before we decided on New York. But we ultimately said, let's just do it, because you may not ever get a chance to move to New York City ever again. Let's just try it, I'm a big believer of, as I said earlier on, getting out your comfort zone and trying things. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
You can always do something else. A lot of times people think decisions you can't get out of.
For sure, mate. And I'm a believer of you get out of life what you put in. And sometimes, things get in the way and what have you. But I really believe that to be successful in any aspect of life, you have to jump. You have to pounce on something. You have to go for it. And I've always believed that. And a lot of that mentality comes down to, like I said earlier on, my upbringing through my mum and dad. But certainly now, at this stage of my life, my wife's willingness to do it. Because at that point, of all the things I just said, buying for the first time, moving to New York, she's heavily pregnant, she's starting a new job, I'm potentially starting a new job. There are plenty that would have bottled that and said, no, we can't do this, it's too risky. And so the current situation I find myself in, I owe everything to my wife. And the risk and the gamble that she was willing to take with me. And so, I can't think of anything else that I've been scared of, because with the whole MLS on Apple thing, Nick, I don't know how they put the production together like they did. They did it so quickly, and well done to everybody that was involved in putting it together. But, it took some time to hire the commentators. And so for a while, we weren't sure. Like, I genuinely wasn't sure.
Right.
And there was one point when I was looking around thinking, I don't know where my next paycheck's coming from. And things would have been fine ultimately, because CBS popped up and I had I did have other possibilities, but I really wanted to work with the Apple projects.
Your proximity in New York, did that help you with the CBS deal?
That would be a question for them, I think. I'm not really sure. I assume so. But
is the studio there?
The studio's in Connecticut, so it's a 45-minute drive from my front door. So it's ideal for sure. But I think that probably is the best way to answer that, Nick. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head now professionally where I've been scared. And I don't even know if I was scared then. I was, more apprehensive more than anything maybe. But I'm sure there was one or two moments when I was scared, for sure.
Yeah. What about on the kind of reverse side? Is there something that you seem to have a great memory and vivid memory of lots of moments in your life? What is something in your career that maybe you would replay over and over in your head, and it's like so clear? Like, it's from your perspective, it's not pictures, it's not what you went back and you're like, yep, I know this.
Cool. Man, that is a question. I tell you the one thing that sticks out, and it only sticks out because it was brought up recently in a conversation I had with someone. I'll always remember the weekend of my 30th birthday when Minnesota were ironically playing Sporting Kansas City. And if they won, they got into the playoffs for the first time since for the first time ever. It would have been for the first time ever. And Allianz Field was bouncing. My parents flew in to surprise me. My wife had organised all this amazing parties with our closest friends and everything. And I remember it was 1-1, and Hassani Dotson picks the ball up from pass, I think from Ozzy Alonso, and kind of wriggles through the SKC backline and hits this awful deflected shot, but it goes into the net. And the stadium just absolutely goes beyond bizarre. And just the stadium erupted. It was incredible. I remember, again, it came up recently in conversation. I don't know what came over me, Nick. I sort of screamed Hassani Dotson's name. And I must have seen like a newspaper headline or something. I can't remember. But I remember saying, hold the back page. Hold the back page. And again, I don't really know why. I don't know if I just assumed there might have been something happening in the Minnesota sports world where the paper was written or something, you know what I mean? And,
right.
I just remember saying that. And then something about Minnesota being in the playoffs for the first time, or something along those lines. But that's a moment that stands out professionally, for sure, because it meant so much to the community at that point. The other one as well, now that I'm thinking about it, was when Ozzy Alonso scored the first goal at Allianz as well. That was special because, again, it was almost like an accumulation of relief, because there was a time in Minnesota where people weren't sure they were going to have a team anymore. Yeah. And now here they are, sort of risen from the ruins, if you will, up to this is that immaculate soccer-specific stadium. And we've just scored the first ever goal. And I was doing the game on the radio. And I can't remember what I said. You'll have to go and find the clip. It's out there somewhere, Nick. But I remember sort of saying something along the lines of, it's a goal for Adrian Heath's Minnesota. It's a goal for all of Minnesota. Something along those lines, you know. Anyway, there was a punch to the delivery. Right. Because it meant so much. And I'm doing this, and there's people in front of me. The booth in Minnesota, there's corporate seats in front, so you often have people in front of you. And I will always remember there's what I'm assuming was a father and a son holding each other, and the father has got his son sort of lifting him up, and this little boy, I don't know how old he was, maybe 7 or 8, he just looks up to the booth, looks up directly in my eyes, and is just like punching the air, like so happy. And in that moment, Nick, I was like, this is why we do what we do. To capture this moment So that little boy will probably never have a moment like that again. I hope he does, but I doubt he'll have that moment again when he's in the arms of his father celebrating a moment of history like that.
Right.
And a moment of hysteria like that as well. It was a goal that, it was more than a goal, it meant so much for sure.
Right. What is something you wish people would ask you when they're interviewing you that they don't normally ask? Or what is something you wish people would ask you that you're like, nobody ever asked me this?
I don't know, Nick. That's an intriguing question.
That's a tough question. Yeah, it's a tricky question.
Yeah. Because I don't often do interviews about myself, to be honest, because I don't like doing them about myself. I'll be honest, this has been a bit of a struggle for me.
Oh, you're doing well. Thank you.
I don't like talking about myself, really, because it's never about me. It's never about the commentator. It never should be.
Do you have ideas or dreams of future work? Because as much as everybody loves what they're currently doing and wants to do that and, putting their energy in, you probably have things you're like, this would be nice someday.
Yeah, I mean, look, like every soccer broadcaster right now, the pinnacle is the World Cup. And that's what I want to do. I want to reach the pinnacle. And if that is commentating on the World Cup, then great. That's what I want to do. I want to continue to get better. And I think it's great now that there are so many wonderful voices in this country that the standard has gone up and you have to be at a certain level every single week. Otherwise, you're found out. And I like that pressure. I like that. I have internal pressures on myself all the time, Nick, but I like that external pressure that you have to be of a certain standard. Otherwise, you may not be brought back. I don't mind that pressure at all. I quite enjoy pressure. Pressure's a privilege, in my opinion. So, but no, that's an interesting question. I guess right now, TBD, we'll wait and see. I'm 34, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have to remind myself with that at times because I've been doing this a long time and I'm still only 34. So my hope is that I've got another 30, 40 years doing this.
That would be an amazing career already that you already have, and adding 30 years on top of that.
I really hope so. And so maybe that's the answer. Maybe that I have the longevity and I'm consistent enough where I get so I'm in my 70s and, I can choose when I want to walk away. I don't want to be pushed aside. Maybe that's the answer to that. Maybe that's the goal, longevity. And I choose when I want to go.
And maybe some 21-year-olds talking about how Cal Williams gave them an opportunity and that started their launch.
I hope so. I really hope so. I'm a big believer of that, Nick. I honestly, because I know how hard it is in this industry, regardless of where you are in the world, I will answer anybody, whether they email me or reach out on LinkedIn or whatever. I will always try and answer people. It might take a few days, but I'll always try and help people. And it's the same with the established lads and ladies as well. Like, I believe we have to help each other. We're all in this together. We can't be against each other if we're going to grow this game. We have to be with each other and helping each other. Just the other day, I was giving contacts to somebody who perhaps doesn't have as much work as they want. And yeah, sure, try this person. I don't believe in this dog-eat-dog mentality. I understand it's there, but I don't want to operate like that. Mm-hmm. So if anybody ever has any issues, I always want to try and help. And I think that's so important moving forward. We are one footballing community. We're the footballing community in North America, and we've got an unbelievable opportunity ahead of us in this World Cup. And the more we go into it as one, as opposed to being divided and having different ideas and whatnot, then the better. We have to go into it together. And so it's cliche, but I don't like using the word family, but we are all one. We have to be a unit moving forward for sure.
The community is definitely growing exponentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's only a good thing.
Right. All right. Our last moments is just 2 minutes of quick stoppage time questions.
It's stoppage time.
So here's the first one. Do you have a favorite or a unique personal ritual? Either broadcasting or something else.
Listening to music, like from a professional point of view, listening to music. Outside of the professional world, my favorite thing to do is nothing with my daughter and my wife.
That's great. And you got a great place to do nothing with in New York.
Yes.
All right. Is there a stadium or event besides the World Cup that you've not been in that you want to call a match in?
I'd like to do the Copa America. I love South American football. I love every football. I know this, but I was fortunate enough to do 3 years of the Copa Libertadores as the lead English voice and did 3 finals.
That's their club cup, right?
That's their version of the UEFA Champions League, yes. And I was doing it for 3 years off tube in Miami, and I fell in love with South American football then. So doing the Copa America would be something I would love to do for sure.
All right. Do you have a favorite unplugged activity? Sounds like you probably already answered that. Just going out and doing something with your kid and wife.
Just hanging out with my wife and my daughter. We're very fortunate where we live in Brooklyn. Really good space to do a lot if we want to, but also it's a good space to not do a lot as well. It's a very chilled place compared to Manhattan. So we can get into Manhattan if we want to in 15 minutes, easy, no problem. But I like doing not a lot with my family.
All right. Do you have a go-to snack? Maybe while watching a match that you're not commentating on?
Yeah, I'm trying to eat healthily because I have a dad bod right now and I'm trying to get rid of it. But when I'm not eating healthily, I love, especially this time of year, I love the little ice pops, the little, I don't know what you guys call them in this country, like just little like ice lollipop things.
Yeah.
I love munching on some of those. Yeah, that's probably my answer there, yeah.
All right. This is funny because you mentioned interior design, but you don't have to necessarily think about this. What design impresses you more, interior or exterior? I think you already...
There you go, interior, yeah.
Yeah. What do you find starting a project or finishing one more gratifying?
Starting, because the possibilities are endless.
All right. What recharges you? It's a long season. You never get a break.
What recharges me? The obvious answer is sleep, which nowadays not getting enough of with the litany of travel and work in all different parts of North America and elsewhere. I think, again, I'd probably answer again, just being with my family, just chilling out with my family. I love, as simple as it sounds, Nick, I love just playing with my daughter. You know, it's like she's 18 months now. She's at that age where she's walking and talking and very inquisitive. And, you know, that I think that's the only time when I really can properly switch off from football and broadcasting, because there's always something that reminds me of it and I'm always thinking about things. And but that's the true time when I do feel like I can switch off, when I'm just 100% focused on my daughter.
All right. Last question. If you played in today's MLS, what position would you play and what type of player would you resemble that plays in the current MLS?
Well, just because I did before, I would probably say I'll play centre half or maybe a holding midfielder, but I don't think I'm fit enough to go back and forth. I'd probably say centre half. I would like to hope that I would resemble somebody like Walker Zimmerman. You know, somebody who's like a no-nonsense centre half. Just get the ball out of the way. I don't really want the ball. You want the ball? You have the ball. I'm going to take it off you, though, if you're an opposing player. But in terms of when we're in possession, I don't want this. No. Give it to the number 10 or whatever. You know, I'll flip it into the wide areas or the channels or whatever. You guys have that. I don't want this. So that's probably the answer there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Cal, for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Nick, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Keep up the great work. As I said earlier on, it's podcasts like this that are driven by people like you. Such a massive reason as to why we are where we are right now. So keep doing this, mate. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Al has become a staple in world football commentating, from MLS to Conmebol to the English Premier League to LaLiga, and he continues to rewrite and up his craft. I foresee him being a part of football commentating for a long time, doing many World Cup matches. I love how focused he is on building community with this group of commentators and bonding with them, and also that he's always learning from the fans in the cities that he visits for each match. Our conversation reinforced in my head that you have to continue to put yourself out there like Cal and prepare and do the work to put yourself in the best position to be successful. This has been another episode of the CLTFC podcast, where we bring you the fascinating people who work in the world of football. The CLTFC podcast is edited and produced by Nick Finelli and Eli Finelli. Do us a favor. Please share this episode with others. 5-star review us and follow CLTFC podcast on Instagram, X, and YouTube. Until next time, enjoy the day.